Is it not? It's working. I guess it's working. Or is it? Okay, it's working. Excellent. Sorry about all the confusion, having a little bit of a computer issue. But it seems like we're working. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I'll just give you a moment while I finish getting set up. Any minute now. The internet's running a little slow, so there we go. Almost ready, just bear with me. And one more page. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to tonight's episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. I am your host, as always, Kevin Mears, demonologist, paranormal investigator, and the Paranormal Encyclopedia. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the bogus medical cures I was supposed to do last week. I am feeling better, mostly, but we should be able to get through this. I also do want to, real quick, do something I usually try to avoid and address the public situation that we're finding ourselves in right now, particularly regarding Dr. Seuss and what's the other thing? Oh, Mr. Potato Head. So, as just about everybody who watches this is undoubtedly aware, there's a current big controversy going on that the left is trying to cancel Dr. Seuss and Mr. Potato Head. To be precise, they're upset because the Dr. Seuss estate has decided to discontinue 6 books of his. Keep in mind, and this is the first thing I want to point out, Dr. Seuss wrote 45 books in his lifetime. 6 of them are in question. Not all of them, not even most of them. And this wasn't, the left threw a huge fit and they decided to discontinue these books. The estate spent months, they consulted educators, they consulted experts. They consulted the fact, for that matter, that Dr. Seuss himself later in life was not comfortable with the racist overtones in some of his books. And they decided to discontinue these books. None of which, I mean, we're not talking about Green Eggs and Ham. We're not talking about The Cat in the Hat. Although, funny enough, they did feel there were pictures in The Cat in the Hat that were racially insensitive, but they decided to continue the book anyway. We're not talking about, Gordon Hears a Who, or most of his well-known books. We're talking about 6 relatively obscure, here to my knowledge, of his 45 books that they're just not going to publish anymore. The right is overreacting to this. And I'll point out 2 things that I find particularly ironic. First is that in 2012, a movie came out called The Lorax, based on one of Dr. Seuss's books, The Lorax. If you do a little bit of research, Bill O'Reilly and other people at Fox News and other conservatives slammed that movie for its green message. They found it unacceptable. They wanted it banned. They didn't want people to go to see it, which creates a very obvious double standard here of cancel culture. Cancel culture is wrong when the left does it because they find something immoral and wrong, but acceptable when the right does it. Case in point, the Lorax movie. Case in point, trying to ban Dungeons and Dragons and sue TSR, the makers of Dungeons and Dragons, trying to ban Teletubbies, trying to ban Pokemon, trying to ban video games, trying to ban heavy metal. The right has been trying to cancel things that it finds morally wrong for decades. The difference is that the left doesn't usually use the government to do it. It uses the media. It uses social pressure. The right usually tries to pass obscenity laws or bring bogus lawsuits or pass federal laws. There were Senate hearings with Frank Werther about comic books, about the mistaken belief that they cause children to be violent. That's a big difference. And what is going on with my video that keeps cutting in and out like that? This whole thing is just ridiculous. The First Amendment, freedom of speech, says that the government can't interfere with people's speech. It says nothing about private businesses. It's not meant to say anything about private businesses. You're entitled to say what you want. That doesn't mean that somebody has to give you a platform to do so. If you go walk into your work tomorrow and start lecturing everyone who walks through the door about your preferred political candidate, you're going to get fired. And if you go to unemployment and say, I'm entitled to do this because First Amendment, they're going to laugh at you and throw you out. Private businesses have no legal requirement to support your speech. Period. But what might arguably be even dumber than the Dr. Seuss thing is the Mr. Potato Head thing. They're not canceling Mr. Potato Head. You can go right now to a store and buy Mr. Potato Head. It'll say Mr. Potato Head on the package. It'll have all the bits you expect Mr. Potato Head to have. You'll be able to do it 10 years from now, unless something changes. Why? Because the entire brand, the entire line, used to be called Mr. Potato Head. The company decided this, since the line includes as Mrs. Potato Head, this is a little silly. So instead of calling all of them Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head alike, Mr. Potato Head, they're just calling it Potato Head. That's it. It's a mountain out of a molehill. This whole thing is stupid and childish. But I wanted to comment on it briefly. But let's get into something even more ridiculous and childish and talk about ridiculous medical remedies. Can you guys still hear me when that happens? Okay, it does seem like it's still... This is getting really annoying. I may wind up... But okay. For those of you who wind up just tuning in later with the... yes, the video keeps going in and out. The audio seems okay. The video... I don't know what's going on with the video. The internet connection today seems to be spotty, I guess. There's not a whole lot I'm going to be able to do about it. But I think I'm going to keep going regardless because keep calm and stream on or something. So let's talk about ridiculous medical cures. And the first thing to realize about dumb medical cures, they've been going on for thousands of years. And when I say that, there's two broad categories, I guess, when you're talking about historically talking about dumb medical cures. Hey, Lisa, for truth. One are medical cures that we realize are dumb now because science has advanced considerably. And then there are ones that they knew were dumb even back then. Or they should have known were dumb even back then. And one of the most common cures up until even the 20th century was mercury. The first emperor of China was convinced that he could use alchemical mixtures based in mercury to live forever. Unsurprisingly, he died of mercury poisoning, I believe. But people have used mercury for thousands of years. It was very common in alchemy, for example, to attempt to create the elixir, the life of substance that would allow humans to live for eternity. The thing you run into, in fact, and this I found very interesting, is from the ancient Greeks up until around the Renaissance, the dominant idea of medicine was what was called the four humors. They believed that the human body had four humors in it. Let me look them up so I can get the names exactly right. But blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm. So we have these four, each of which you need for your body to function properly. To give you a little more detail, they believed that blood was produced exclusively by the liver, and it was associated with what they called the sanguine nature, enthusiastic, active, and social. Yellow bile was produces aggression and reciprocally excess anger to cause liver derangement and imbalance in the humors. Black bile, the word melancholy from the Greek, means black bile, in fact. Depression was attributed to an excess or unnatural black bile secreted by the spleen. Cancer was also attributed to an excess of black bile concentrated in a specific area. Then you have phlegm, which was thought to be associated with reserved behavior and preserved in the word phlegmatic. It is by far basically phlegm. It was described in 1910. Rhetorically is a strange liquid which is the cause of humors of psoriasis, of rheumatism, of cacomia. Where is it? Who has ever seen it? Who has ever seen it? What can we say of this fanciful classification of humors into four groups, of which two are absolutely imaginary? Comes from Charles Rickett in 1910. So these four substances were supposed to exist in the body, and disease was supposed to be caused by an imbalance in them. This leads to the idea that the way to cure disease is to rebalance the humors. One of the most famous way of doing so was bleeding someone. The way this was first carried out was they literally just cut you and drain blood out. Let me just check something real quick. In fact, George Washington died because of this. Commander-in-Chief woke up on December 14, 1799 with a sore throat. After a series of medical procedures, including the drawing of nearly 40% of his blood, he died that evening. So, yeah, Washington died because of this idea. A little bit later, the guy, they started out just by cutting people open and draining blood out. And, Lisa, I believe you're correct. It only works for chromatosis. I'm not real familiar with that condition, but I'm going to assume you're right. It sounds accurate. But the reality is it doesn't work. What's ironic is one of the offshoots of this was they realized, just taking a knife and cutting people open wasn't precise. You could nick an major artery, have them bleed to death. You could hit the wrong spot and not drain the blood out of the area that needed to be drained, which led to the use of leeches. Because they would put the leech in a vial and then force the leech to feed from only one specific area. The irony of which is that while using bleeding to cure disease is worse than useless, there are medical uses for leeches and certain enzymes that they carry. And apparently the condition, according to Lisa, is too much iron in the blood. Okay, that would make sense. The other offshoot of this concept, though, of these four humors is, okay, you draw blood out. What about the other ones? Well, the other one on the list of four you'll recall is the black bile. How do you deal with black bile? Not to be crude, but you make somebody poop. Mercury and arsenic and antimony, if you remember the everlasting poop pills, and if you don't, I'll explain them again in a minute, all can cause you to poop. And done properly will cause you to poop excessively. And because this is extremely unhealthy, you get very dark black excrement, and they thought that the black color was the black bile being ejected from the system, therefore it's good for you. This also was thought to be a way of purging parasites from your system, which we'll come back to, because this is an idea that comes up a lot in bogus medical remedies. The problem, of course, is that as we all know today, mercury is highly toxic. Arsenic is highly toxic. Though, ironically, arsenic also has medical uses. And I'm going to circle back to this concept in a second. Antimony is very toxic. They knew this in the Middle Ages. They knew that too much mercury would kill you. They knew that too much antimony would kill you. So for those of you who weren't here, let me run through again the concept of the everlasting poop pill. So there's an element known as antimony. Antimony is a very heavy metal that will cause diarrhea and will cause vomiting. And they would make pills out of this that you would swallow. The metal was so heavy, it would pass through your digestive system, and you'd defecate it out. You'd shit it out. That pill was still usable because it didn't get digested much. It did get digested. You wind up absorbing the antimony, but you'd still have most of the pill there that could be used. So that people would plug it out of the latrine or out of the chamber pot, clean it up, and then take it again in the future. They would pass it to their children, and it would be passed to their grandchildren. These pills would pass down through families for generations. The kicker is they understood that this metal is toxic and can kill you. There is a myth of a particular group of monks that were using this very regularly, and it killed them all. So supposedly the reason we call it antimony is it's anti-monk. That's not true. The name antimony, like most at least like many names for elements, comes from Latin. But it was well known that this could do this. That they thought that's why they called it antimony. The other thing I find very interesting and a little disappointing is there's a very important figure in the history of medicine called Paracelsus. He took his name because there was an earlier highly respected Greek physician named Celsus. Paracelsus considered himself superior to Celsus, so para meaning beyond or above So above Celsus, essentially, is his name. Because obviously the guy was very humble. But Paracelsus was an alchemist in the Middle Ages. And a very important alchemist. Let me look up exactly when his time period was. 1494 to 1541. Born Theophrastus von Hohenheim. And his full name's even longer than that. But he's considered a very important figure in the history of medicine. And one of the main reasons he's considered so important is he was one of the first people to seriously challenge this idea of the four humors, which is good and extremely important. We needed to move off of this outdated and frankly nonsensical idea of medicine. The problem was he replaced it with this idea of using minerals and metals and things like that, and your body needing to balance these out in the body, which in itself isn't always a bad thing. There's certainly any number of diseases and conditions that can be caused by a lack of the right minerals and vitamins and things like that in the body. But the problem is he was a big advocate of the use of mercury and other toxic elements. Granted, this also ties into the other thing he's important and famous for, which is he's also known as the father of toxicology. He's particularly famous for something he said of poisons, which is sola dosis facit venenum, meaning only the dose makes the poison. He used it to defend his use of various inorganic substances in medicine, which was regularly criticized by outsiders. Now, he's not entirely wrong. The thing that he is saying here is how much of a dose you take of something matters to. If you take just about any substance taken to excess can be deadly. This is true. You can die from drinking too much water. You can die from getting too much oxygen. You can die from just an excess of just about everything. By the same token, small doses of some very toxic substances can have medical benefits. For example, they have discovered that while ingesting arsenic is a terrible idea, a small amount of white arsenic, properly targeted, can be an effective treatment for cancer. There is a plant called foxglove, or digitalis. It is, by itself, it is highly toxic. It will kill you if you eat it. Properly controlled is an effective heart medication. Ironically, and this is another very good example of a common mistake that gets made by the quack medical community today, and we're going to talk about this. There's this idea that it's called the naturalistic fallacy, that natural is automatically better for you. It's hogwash. And foxglove is a perfect example. We have a heart medicine based on the plant foxglove, derived from the plant foxglove, which is very effective. We have a synthetic medicine based on that medicine that is more effective and has fewer side effects. Because the reality is sometimes the manufactured version is safer. And often taking things in their wild form isn't all that safe. Because the reality is some things, are relatively safe to just take naturally. Or I'm certainly not denouncing the whole idea of herbal remedies and things like that. There's some ideas of value there. The problem is that you don't know the dose you're going to get. And often it's a fairly low dose. It may not even be enough to have an effect. The advantage of medicine is they can control the dose. They know exactly how much of the active ingredient you're going to get every time you take the pill. It is often a more powerful effect, so if you have a relatively minor situation, you may not want to do that. That's fine. But particularly in a hospital setting, they need to understand exactly how much of what you're taking so they can measure how it's affecting you, look for potential side effects, and so they can counteract them and adjust dosages accordingly. None of which they can do when you're just taking the plant itself, because for example, one leaf of a plant may have a very different concentration of the active substance than the next. And again, by and large, natural remedies are not automatically bad. That's not what I'm saying. It's just the reality of they're not necessarily... Natural doesn't equal better, despite what people think. Look at any one of a number of the things that I've mentioned. Like I said, just taking arsenic in its natural form will kill you. Dosed properly, administered properly, it can save your life from cancer. It's a big difference. There are a number of other, curare, the famous blow dart poison. Mixture of natural substances that make it would be lethal. It is actually an effective medicine. One of the most common drugs that many of you have probably taken derive from something much more serious, but again, the power of properly controlled dose. Anyone who's ever had Novocaine or lidocaine, or most of the other drugs that end with the suffix "caine," those are derivatives of cocaine. Again, controlled dosage. Although, on the other hand, there are uses for the coca leaf plant of the plant. The cocaine, the leaves that cocaine is derived from, particularly when you in combating altitude sickness, which are much safer, which are actually fairly safe, because it's a much smaller dosage than you get in actual cocaine. And that's kind of one of the big points, though, is to drive home here, is that a lot of quack remedies, because it's a good point at this point to start talking a little bit about more modern ideas of bogus medical remedies. And the thing you find out is a lot of them use the same concepts you found in the Middle Ages, slightly updated. There is, for example, an infamous woman here on YouTube who has been targeted by any number of people. I believe that I had some videos about her. I know that Jeff Holiday has done videos about her. Heck, she's been on the Dr. Phil's show, which is sort of a feat in itself, given he's not the most qualified of medical experts. But Julian Epperly, who offers what's called chili juice. Chili juice is a combination of cabbage and sea salt. Toxic doses of sea salt. The problem, aside from the fact that, yes, salt can be very dangerous. in excess is that she's same arguments that you've heard in the late just to justify mercury and arsenic and all of these other things. Supposedly, not of humorous, she isn't out of touch enough with science to make that claim anymore. But supposedly, they will purge your system of parasites. There's this huge notion that's risen up recently that parasites are the real cause of disease, and you need to purge them. You need to detoxify your body, and often, and the reality is a lot of some detoxes are useless nonsense. Some are very dangerous, like chili juice. What she thinks are parasites are actually bits of the lining of her intestinal walls, because it causes violent diarrhea, what she calls waterfalls, and damages your intestines. This is not a good thing. This makes people sicker. That doesn't make them healthy. For God's sakes, anyone, don't take my word for any of this. I highly recommend people do their own research. But go look at Jillian videos. Look up Jillian Juice here on YouTube. Look at her face. I mean, I don't like to make fun of people's appearance, but she looks cold. She looks clammy. This is not the face of someone who's healthy. I mean, look at the person you're taking medical advice from. You've got measurable snow. Yikes. We've been getting warmer up here, thank God. When I was a kid, I loved snow. Now that I'm an adult, I hate it because I have to drive in it. But Jilly Juice is one symptom of a bigger problem. We have a movement these days pushing people away from tradition, from actual medicine, into nonsense. Another really good example of this point is homeopathic remedies. Homeopathy is one of the most ridiculous concepts known to man, in my opinion. You take this. The idea is that if you use the smaller dose of a substance that causes a symptom, can treat the symptom. If you have a fever, take a bit of something that's fever-inducing. If you have a headache, take a small dose of something that will give you a headache. This is obviously not how medicine works, but there's an even bigger problem. How small of a dose? Well, done testing on homeopathic remedies. And most homeopathic remedies don't have any detectable trace of whatever the active substance is at all. I mean, you're talking about if you fill the entire solar system with water, maybe a milliliter or two of the substance is still in that galaxy, that solar system full of water. That's how minute a trace we're talking about. And the reality is it doesn't work. You can, absolutely, and this is true of just about any bogus medical cure you can name. You can find yourself having a positive reaction to bogus medical treatment. This is real. Sometimes it can actually be pretty powerful, particularly for specific conditions, particularly subjective conditions. Pain, for example. Actually, for that matter, they've shown this kind of treatment is fairly good for the symptoms of Parkinson's. Because what's going on is what's called the placebo effect. It works because you believe it works. That's it. The placebo effect can be very powerful. We only barely are beginning to understand it. Yeah, that'll make a difference there, Lisa. But we do know that if you really strongly believe a medication will do something, it sometimes will work. There are limits to what this can do. No matter how much you believe in it, the juice will not like regrow a finger that's been cut off. That just doesn't happen. Yes, I intended to talk about apricot seed in a minute. You cannot shrink tumors with placebo. It doesn't happen. But pain is subjective. Well, there is obviously large neurological components to it. Pain has a psychological component. And if you convince yourself you're not feeling pain, you can offset the pain. Placebos work well with pain. Placebos work well with other subjective symptoms. And what's very interesting, at least to me, is there's a whole series of factors that influence how effective placebos are, up to and including the more you pay for it, the more effective it's going to be. And because this is really bizarre, studies are suggesting even if you know that it's a placebo, it still can work. Now, Lisa for Truth brought up another really good example of what I was saying about how dangerous some of this stuff can be, which is a substance variously called amygdalin laetrile or vitamin B17. It is a derivative from a number of seeds, fruit seeds specifically, most commonly apple seeds and apricot seeds. A number of people of no scientific background whatsoever have claimed that laetrile will treat, cure, or prevent cancer. Most notably, this is a frequent claim of science-denying cook Canthoven, who among other things is a young earth creationist and also believes that he doesn't have to pay taxes because he's a sovereign citizen. The man's delusional, to put it politely. But until he takes it, and I'll give him credit on this, he does seem to practice what he preaches. There are videos of him taking apricot seeds. Reality is that, apricot seeds and apple seeds and a number of other fruit seeds do in fact contain this substance known as amygdalin. When your body breaks amygdalin down for digestion, you get cyanide. Have you ever heard about how there's cyanide in apple seeds? It's true. This is the substance that they're talking about. What's the kicker here is that Kent and other people will tell you that they, meaning the pharmaceutical industry, don't want you to know about B17, vitamin B17, and it is not a vitamin, to be clear. But they don't want you to know about vitamin B17 because it's a natural substance. It can't be patented. Aside from the fact that how some natural substances is debatable. Laetrile, which is another variation of it that you can buy pills of, is a synthetic form of amygdalin that not only can be patented, but it has been patented. The pills you can buy that Kent used to, and his son Eric used to sell, I don't believe they do so anymore, but those pills are a patented chemical because it was synthetically engineered. That matter if it's based on nature means you can't patent it. There's a whole series of medicines that they wouldn't be able to patent anymore. Aspirin, for example, is derived from willow bark. There's a whole series of things based on natural substances that are patented. And this is another common refrain for the quack remedy is they don't want you to know about it. They're trying to suppress it because they want to make money off of you. I am not here to tell you that the pharmaceutical industry is without blame. They make plenty of mistakes. But, I would agree, Kook is the nicest thing we can say about him. But Josh Hunt raises an interesting question, which is, what do I think about drilling holes in people's skulls to remove demons in ancient culture? You're talking about what's called trepanation, if memory serves. I don't know a whole lot about it. Although I do know, strangely enough, that it does have some medical effects. For example, if you do it just right, and do not try this at home, it is extremely dangerous. But done just right, you can essentially rewire your brain to experience a constant. It's like constantly being on psychedelic drugs by drilling a hole in your skull. Again, I do not recommend trying this at home, and certainly don't recommend looking it up to figure out how to do it yourself. You can wind up killing yourself or putting yourself into a vegetative state. Although what's funny for fans of classic 80s comedy, this most likely is what they're talking about in the original 80s movie, the Ghostbusters, when Peter Venkman comments to Dr. Spangler about, remember that time I stopped you from trying to drill a hole in your head? We're talking about trepanation. Certainly, Josh, I would not say that drilling holes in people's heads is an effective way to remove demons. Exorcisms are far less dangerous to work just fine. that, but I don't know. Again, I don't know as much about that as I might like. The reality is there's a whole series of bizarre medical claims that are being made today. So, and one of the biggest claims you'll hear, and this is an important thing to address, in my opinion, is that the argument is always made against traditional medicine, or medical science, I should say, is that they're in it for the money. And if this is correct, we've also found that trepanation can in fact help brain swelling. And you know, and let's face it, pharmaceutical companies are companies. They are in fact trying to make money. That said, the alternative medicine community, homeopathy, natural supplements, business, they're doing another part of polio because use reality. Various reasons. You think you're definitely the vital solution of nutrition. That mainstream medical community. On the other hand, if you look at Alex Jones, if you look at Natural News, both of them actively sell natural supplements, homeopathic remedies, other pieces of nonsense. You know, Natural News particularly loves to champion the value of megadoses of vitamin C. And they directly profit from selling you these supplements. You want another good example of my point? The whole idea that vaccines cause autism, which they absolutely don't. The science is in that's bullshit. But one of the biggest names in that movement, other than Andrew Wakefield, and I'm coming back to that asshole in a second, is Jenny McCarthy. Jenny McCarthy claims that her son became autistic because of vaccines. She also claims she was able to cure his autism. There is a big business of selling bogus autism cures. And when you find the conventions and big meetings of anti-vaxxers, people selling bogus autism cures come along with them. These people think big pharma is big business, and they're not wrong. The pharmaceutical industry is a business. Not everything that it does is morally upstanding, and I'm not saying that they're perfect by any means. But the people that are denouncing them are just as big a business. What's scary is if a pharmaceutical company wants to release a new vaccine or new medicine, they have to go through months, if not years, of testing and retesting and submitting and resubmitting through the Food and Drug Administration. Mistakes happen. Tragic, horrible mistakes happen. There's no denying that. On the other hand, if you claim that if you do not claim that what you are selling cures disease, and you can fudge this in shameless ways. If you say, people claim this may help with, if you put those kind of caveats on it, you can circumvent most or all of the FDA's testing. This is how homeopathic remedies get away with what they do. This is how the essential oils companies get away with what they do. This is particularly how two-time now, I believe, convicted felon Kevin Trudeau gets away with the guy who wrote that book, Natural Cures That They Don't Want You to Know About. This is how he got, for a while, he got away with what he was doing. Until finally the law caught up with him. One of these days, I want to talk to Virgo Triad and join forces to do a whole video about Trudeau and his scams. That man is a real piece of dirt. And is a piece of dirt that has been in and out of prison for various cons. Most famously back in, I want to say, the 90s, he pled no contest to charges of credit card fraud because he was stealing the credit card numbers of people that were paying for his bogus mega memory program, which was supposed to teach you how to have an eidetic memory. It doesn't. But he would basically stealing credit card numbers. And he went to prison for it. He's gone to prison for it again. The problem is he has a good lawyer and a good accountant that have things set up. So, yeah, he'll go to prison and his money will be waiting for him when he comes out. The man is arguably the America's greatest con artist. And he keeps getting away with it. And there are people that still swear that what he's doing is right. Because when you couch what you're doing in this us versus them narrative of how the evil big pharmaceutical companies are out to get you, it sells product. You tie into people's irrational fears. So how do you spot nonsense, quack remedies? There's a much better channel on this I will recommend checking out called Genetically Modified Skeptic. He's an atheist and decidedly not in favor of religion. So he and I understandably don't agree on everything. But I have a lot of respect for what he does, a lot of respect for the work that he's doing. I'd recommend checking him out. But generally speaking, when companies found their claims on it's natural, when companies found their claims on talking about how bad medical science is, especially you'll hear it's like a really good question to ask if somebody says they have a brand new miracle cure. Ask to see the studies. Ask to see peer-reviewed study. Where have peer-reviewed studies been published? If their answer, here's some of the answers you'll get. There are big warning signs. If they start giving you an explanation of why peer reviews science is unreliable, run. The peer review process is not by no means perfect. It's run by humans, so it's never going to be perfect. But it is the baseline standard for evidence in the sciences. If you can't meet that standard, you have a serious problem. And they'll tell you they're too busy getting people better to test their product. How do you know you're making anybody better? How do you know they're not getting worse? How do you know they're not getting better for a week and then dying the next week? This is why you have to test these things. There have been treatments, both in even medical science, that the people seem to get better and then die very rapidly afterwards. This is why how do you know that you've successfully cured the common cold and the person will have epileptic seizures for the rest of their life? How do you know that there's a side effect of what you're doing that's not worse than what you're trying to treat? And this, which leads to another common claim that you should always be wary of. Be wary of anyone who tells you that whatever their treatment is, it doesn't have any side effects. Because if it doesn't have any side effects, it's probably because it doesn't do anything. The reality of it is, if some drugs affect the body's natural chemistry, that's kind of what they're supposed to do. The reality is, if you change the body's inherent chemistry, some of the effects are not going to be what's intended. Or maybe what's intended might take what's intended even further than it should have gone. This is why we have, this is why you get side effects. If somebody says it has no side effects at all, it's probably because it's not doing anything. You know, do your own research. Don't stop at one website. Check other sources. There's a great website called Quackwatch that has a lot of science-based resources. Science-based medicine is another good choice. Do some homework on any proposed medical treatment that falls outside of accepted medicals. Actually, I take that back. If you're going through any significant sort of medical treatment, I encourage you to do some research and find out what you're getting in for. Because the reality is, even accepted, safe medical treatment does have side effects, some of which can be very dangerous. More importantly, you have drug interactions. Doctors and pharmacists should be keeping an eye out for this, but mistakes happen. It always behooves you to be aware of what you're taking, what the potential side effects are, and what it may have, what it may react to that you may be taking. And this doesn't just go for prescribed medicine. Over-the-counter medicine and herbal remedies are true too. There are natural cures that actually work. Because again, I'm not saying that it's all bullshit. There are ones that actually have a positive medical effect, but they can also react to prescribed medications you're taking. Make sure to do the research. Make sure to inform your doctor of everything you take. Whenever you go to a hospital, whenever you go to the doctor, they're going to ask what medications you're taking. Tell them, even if it's an over-the-counter natural supplement. Tell them anyway. It won't hurt to tell them, and it could quite seriously save your life. And we're coming up on the end of our hour. I want to talk a little bit about what's going to happen next week, because I have something really fun planned for next week that I think you guys are going to enjoy. And then I want to wrap things up. So next week, like I said, I want to start expanding my horizons and talking about things other than the paranormal. We're never leaving the paranormal entirely, because I am a paranormal type of guy. But I want to talk about things that are other things that I find fascinating. I think you guys will find fascinating too. So I take the particular subject I find really cool. I'm going to talk about, and in retrospect, I should have done this yesterday, given yesterday was International Women's Day. But next week is a belated International Women's Day special. I'm going to do a special on remarkable women in history, particularly remarkable women warriors in history. We're going to be talking about the most successful pirate in history, who was in fact a Chinese woman. We're going to be talking about Captain Molly, who the first woman to draw a military pension from the United States. And for those of you who don't know who Captain Molly is, she drew a military pension from the United States Congress for the Revolutionary War. We're going to talk about Julie de Albany, the real world equivalent of a Dungeons and Dragons bard. I'm going to leave you all with a very brief story, because she's not technically a warrior, but she is one of the most remarkable women in recent history, in my opinion. And I find her fascinating, and I'm going to mention it as a day late International Women's Day thing, which is a woman by the name, the woman who invented the 21st century. Or at least, if you want to be accurate, she helped invent the 21st century. But it sounds cooler to say she invented the 21st century. So there's a woman in the early 20th century by the name of Hedy Lamarr. Hedy Lamarr was an immigrant to the United States, and pretty much one of the very first beauty queen. Yes, she was born in Austria, died in 2000. So an actress who performed in 30 films over a 28-year career. When she was born in Austria, she came to the United States, fleeing from her husband, who was a wealthy Austrian ammunition manufacturer. Moved to Paris, then to London, met Louis B. Mayer, the head of Metro Goldwyn Mayer, who offered her a whole Hollywood movie contract, where Mayer began promoting her as the world's most beautiful woman. She stars in a number of movies in the United States, and during the Second World War, Miss Lamar happens on an idea with a friend of hers. So during World War II, she learns about radio-controlled torpedoes, emerging technology in naval warfare that could easily be jammed and set off course. She had an idea, and she worked with her friend and composer and pianist, George Antheil, to help implement it. The idea was a frequency hopping signal that could not be traced or jammed. Antheil recalled, "We began talking about the war in which the summer of 1940 was looking most extremely black. Hetty said that she did not feel very comfortable sitting there in Hollywood and making lots of money when things were in such a state. She said that she knew a good deal about munitions and various secret weapons, and she was thinking she could seriously of quitting MGM and going to Washington, D.C. to offer her services to the newly established National Inventors Council." Now, she didn't quit her job, but the two of them worked together on this invention. U.S. patent 2,292,387. It's patented on August 11th of 1942 under her married name Hetty Keisler Markley. The U.S. Navy decided not to implement it at the time. It was classified in the red hot category, first adapted in 1957 to help with the sonobuoy and before the expiration of the patent. Where this becomes important and why this is why I said she helped give birth to she's the mother of the 21st century. Cell phones, Bluetooth, GPS, and Wi-Fi are all based on the technology that this woman patented. She wasn't the only person, because again, she worked with her friend, the composer. But her name on that patent is more than an honorary thing. She actively helped in developing this. And yeah, various spread spectrum techniques are using Bluetooth and all these other technology that wouldn't exist without technology that was developed by one of Hollywood's first beauty queens. Tell me that's not unspeakably cool. I'm really looking forward to next week. I have some really amazing women to talk about. And, this is not a let me be clear, this is not a social justice warrior thing. This is because these stories are incredibly epically cool. I think you're going to agree. And this is the beginning, not the end. There are other stories I want to get into. There are stories, there's stories of fighting Jack Churchill and Wojtek, the decorated Polish war hero from World War II. Both of which are male, though Wojtek's rather special. Oh, the thing, there are lots of stories to tell, lots of history to get into, things that for various reasons, rightly or wrongly, you don't hear about in history class, and we're gonna get into them a little. We're gonna have some fun. We're gonna kick back. We're gonna get into how crazy the world really is. I hope you guys will stick around for this. Like I said, it's not necessarily overtly paranormal, but it's fun. We're not losing the name. This will always be the Paranormal Encyclopedia channel. We will circle back to the paranormal from time to time. It's just time to spread our wings and do some other things. I hope you guys have enjoyed tonight's show. I hope you're looking forward to what's to come. Please let me know what you're thinking in the comments below. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Give me a thumbs down. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns that you don't want to air publicly, my email is in the description. Remember to follow us on Facebook at the Paranormal Encyclopedia, so you can find out what's going on. I can't apologize that there was no show last night. I may or may not move to Tuesdays. I'm deciding that now. Either way, we're probably going to be moving to 8 o'clock at night, just because I'm finding the later time period makes my life a little bit easier. But that's it for tonight. Thank you all so much for tuning in. This is Kevin Mears, the Paranormal Encyclopedia, saying good night and God bless everybody.